Okay, so the recording has started. Good afternoon, everyone. We're excited about this topic about student loan repayment. My name is Chris Elrich. I'm program manager at Dress for Success Cleveland. So today we have a guest from Legal Aid Society. We have Joshua Robinger. So just kind of give you a little bit of his background. He is a supervising attorney in the Economic Justice Practice Group at the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland and a student loan justice fellow with the Student Borrower Protection Center. He handles cases concerning debt collection, unemployment, compensation, employment discrimination, wage theft, and student loans. In fall of 2021, he served as a negotiator and negotiated rulemaking related to student loans with the U.S. Department of Education. Prior to joining legal aid, Josh worked in private practice, served as an attorney at the Project on Predatory Student Lending, and clerk on the district court for the District of Massachusetts and First Circuit Court of Appeals. Josh received his JD from Harvard Law School and his bachelor's of arts degree in political science and philosophy from the George Washington University. So I think we have someone on here that has a good idea when it comes to student loans, and definitely with all the press that has been going on as we started in the new year. I'm sure many have questions about what is the real story when it comes to student loan repayment. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Josh.
Great. Thanks so much, Chris. It's nice to be here. So I'm going to go through a slide deck, but particularly because we're a small group, please, raise I think there's a little raise hand icon. Feel free to do that, or just jump on if you have questions. I'm happy to take them at any point. So, you know, otherwise, I'm just going to jump right into this discussion of student loans and in particular the return to repayment. So the agenda for today is kind of just a brief introduction of what we do at Legal Aid, some fundamentals of student loans, just so we kind of are all on the same page. Talk a little bit about the end of the federal payment pause and what you need to know right now. Highlight some time-limited programs that are in existence, some other forgiveness and discharge options, and then go through some resources that you can always go back to in the future. Okay. So at Legal Aid, we are a free legal service provider. We provide services across a number of different areas, including education, so financial issues, so consumer issues, for example. We do landlord-tenant issues, government benefits work, employment law, so discrimination, wage theft, unemployment. We do family law, and we also do some immigration work. There are a whole bunch of very specific areas that we get into in these different categories, but generally speaking, these are the topics we work on. All of our services are completely free, and the level of service we provide depends on the specific need of the client and the legal issue involved. But it can range from a brief service, so answering questions and providing advice, to drafting a quick letter on behalf of the client, all the way to full representation in, for example, litigation. To be eligible for our services, someone has to be located or have a problem in one of our service areas. So we serve in 5 counties: Cuyahoga, Geauga, Ashtabula, Lake, and Lorraine. The household that the person resides in has to have an income or assets below 200% of the federal poverty line. We have to make sure there's no conflict of interest. So essentially, we can't represent, for example, both spouses in a divorce case. We have to just make sure that we don't have any conflicts. And then we can also only take on matters where there's a legal question at stake and a legal solution involved. And again, as to the specific legal areas we work in, we have that wide range of service areas. If you are interested in our services or know someone who might benefit, we have a number of different ways in which you can reach out to us. We have online intake applications and various Know Your Rights resources available on our website. We also have a phone intake line where you can do your intake right over the phone. Um, we also have some information lines for tenant, landlord tenant issues, and then also for economic justice issues. So, in particular, student loans and employment law. And those lines are if you find yourself in a situation where you really just have a quick question, um, and you don't know, you don't necessarily need more in-depth one-on-one service. Those lines are great options for you. And then, like we're doing right now, we provide presentations and kind of know your rights and education throughout the community. And so, if you're working with an organization where legal aid could potentially be helpful, just shoot an email to outreach@lascleve.org. And I should say before I continue, I actually can no longer see if someone raises their hands. I'm just looking at my slide deck, and so please just come off mute if you have questions as we're going along. Okay, so the key takeaways today, I think, are just two big ones. First is repayment of federal student loans has started. What that means is borrowers should be taking steps right now to make sure that they're in the right repayment plan um, now and moving forward so that they are in a position where they can avoid default in the future. So that's number one, repayment has started. Other big takeaway is there are some time limited programs that are available for borrowers. And so borrowers who are in default or borrowers who have long-standing debt should consider utilizing these time limited options. Okay, so where I want to start though is just going over some very basic student loan information. Who has student loans? What types of loans exist? How do you figure out what types of loans you have? And who's all involved in this student loan? So as of right now, there are 45 million federal or 45 million student loan borrowers. The bulk of those borrowers have what's called federal student loan debt. And almost $2 trillion in federal student loan debt. It's actually expected by this year that 1.7 trillion number will get up to $2 trillion. About 40% of borrowers who have student loan debt never completed their program, so they don't actually have the credential to go along with that debt. And about 1 in 5 student loan borrowers were in default before the pandemic started. I think it's also important to note that student loan debt has a particularly negative effect on borrowers of color. There's a difference as to who has to take out loans in the first place. There's a difference as to how much students are borrowing, and there are distinctions in repayment. And these issues, these disparities are flowing from longstanding and structural historical racism and ongoing discrimination in the workforce, which leads to the student loan crisis being a racial justice problem, racial justice issue in our country. It's also an intergenerational problem. Nearly 9 million student loan borrowers are over the age of 50, and the fastest growing portion of the population with student loan debt are those who are 65 years and older. And that's for borrowers who have debt of their own and have just had it for long periods of time or were going back to school, but also an increasing need for borrowers to take out loans for their children or grandchildren. So, big picture here, this is not a young person's problem. It is a problem that spans age groups and, is one where, as in particular, baby boomers are starting to retire, the student loan burden remains a barrier to that retirement.
Josh, can I just pause back on that slide that you were on? And so uh, this is very telling because most people, anytime when you hear student loan debt, you think of, individuals who just came out of high school or like you said, very early in their 20s, maybe early 30s. And so this is pretty surprising to me, but makes sense, right? That they may help out not only their family members, maybe with their education, but after the pandemic and after employment changes, and many folks may not have been able to retire when they would like to retire and they need to extend their education, they may have had to go back to school. And like you said, now they're adding on additional debt. So thank you for sharing this
Yeah.
information.
No, of course. I think it always is something that surprises folks because, yeah, you think student loans, you think of someone who just graduated, or I think there's a lot of discussion in the media, like doctors and lawyers are the ones with student loan debt, and that just isn't an accurate picture of who is burdened by student loan debt. And this is just kind of one of the demographic cross sections where it's a particular burden. Um, so the next kind of fundamental question is, what kind of student loans exist? And here, I think there are two main distinctions for us to start with, and that's between a private student loan and a federal student loan. A private student loan are those that are not subsidized or really regulated by the federal government. They are issued by a private bank or by a school, and they are solely between the lender and the borrower. And so that's why we call them private student loans. On the other hand, what I think most people are familiar with are what are called federal student loans. And those are ones that are directly issued or regulated by the federal government. Um, there are some distinctions within the federal student loan program, but on the whole, federal student loan programs provide many more rights to borrowers as compared to private student loans. And that's just because they're much more extensively regulated than private student loans, since the federal government is involved in the lending itself. So within the federal student loan world, which is where most of our discussion today is going to focus, because that's where most of student loan debt is, there are a few different types of federal student loans. And the main types are what are called FFEL student loans, FFEL, or direct student loans. FFEL student loans are those that are no longer being issued, but if you have loans from before July 2010, it's possible that you have a FFEL federal student loan. And a FFEL federal loan is actually issued by a private lender, so a bank, but is then guaranteed by the federal government. So essentially, the bank will issue you the loan, but if someone defaults on that loan, the federal government is then stepping in and paying the bank and taking over the loan. And so these are considered federal loans because of that guarantee. And so there are a lot of protections that come along with them. In addition to that program, though, the one that's really most commonplace today, and the one that's most relevant for borrowers if you've taken a loan since July 2010, are direct student loans. And these are loans that are directly issued by the federal by the federal government, and so they're loans between the federal government and the borrower. In general, the terms and the conditions of these loans and the rights borrowers have are the same across FFEL and direct. But there are a few really specific places where the differences matter, which is why I'm flagging it right now at the beginning. I also want to highlight Parent Plus loans. In general, these loans are direct loans. They're just a specific type of direct loans. But I'm calling them out here because number one, this is where the parent and not the student is responsible for repaying the loan. And number two, just because there are a few places, again, where the types of rights that borrowers have are a little bit different for Parent Plus loans. So you may be asking yourself, well, how do I know what type of loans I have? And really the best way to figure that out is through the Federal Student Aid's website. So there's something called an NSLDS, the National Student Loan Data System. And this kind of system will tell you exactly what type of federal loan you have, whether it's a direct, FFEL, Parent Plus, whether it, and so forth. And the way to do that, the easiest way to do that is just to go to the Federal Student Aid website and log in with your Federal Student Aid ID. And then you'll be able to kind of tell what type of loan you have. You can also call the Federal Student Aid office, has a phone number you can call, and you can just ask them what type of student loan do I have, and they will tell you you have a FFEL loan, you have a direct loan. Now, if you have private student loans, though, that will not show up in the federal student aid system. And instead, the only way to determine whether you have a private loan is to either look at the contract that you entered into with the lender, or pulling a free credit report, and it'll usually show up on your free credit report. And you can do that at annualcreditreport.com. You're entitled to a free credit report 3 times a year from different reporting agencies. And that'll show you, for the most part, your private student loans as well. So who are the key players that you need to know about? We've talked a little bit about them already. So there's the Department of Education and the Federal Student Aid Office in particular. And that's the entity for federal student loans that is going to be kind of most relevant for folks with federal student loans. There are also private banks or institutions who might have the loan if you have private loans, or who might have issued the loans if you have one of those older FFEL student loans. And then there's also loan servicers. And this is where things can get confusing. So you may have heard of companies like Mohila or Advantage or Nelnet, or previously Great Lakes, or Navient. And a lot of people will think, oh, I don't know what, I have a Navient loan or I have a Mohila loan. And in truth, they actually have federal loans. It's just that these companies are third-party companies that are directly hired by the government and private lenders to manage the loan on behalf of the government or the lender. And so the entity that, borrowers are actually most familiar with and who are kind of they're interfacing with the most are these third-party loan servicers. And I flag that just because, number one, it's important for borrowers to know who their loan servicer is, because that's who they're making payments to, and that's who they're going to apply to for certain rights and discharge and various options that they may have. And two, just to flag that even though that, they may have Mohila as their loan servicer, that doesn't necessarily tell them what type of loan they have, and what options may be available to them. Okay, so moving on, I think the biggest issue in the student loan world right now is just that there is the end of the COVID-19 payment pause. So as many of you probably know, when COVID-19 first started, the government placed a moratorium on the repayment of most federal student loans. And so most borrowers for over 3 years have not had interest accruing on their loans and have not had to make payments on their student loans. If you did not get that benefit, that is a tell that you either had private loans or a commercially held FFEL federal loans, because they didn't get that benefit. But if you did get that benefit, that's also a pretty strong tell that you had either a direct federal loan or a FFEL student loan that the Department of Education now holds on its own. In any event, though, the big dates there have already passed. As of September 1st of last year, interest started to accrue again on federal student loans. And as of October 1st of 2023, bills started to be sent out and borrowers have had to make payments. Now, there's something that the Department of Education is calling the on-ramp at the end of this payment pause, which is important to know about. Um, so basically from October 1st of 2023 through September 2024, the Department of Education is giving folks grace with respect to making their payments on federal student loans. They are saying if you do not make payments on these loans, which are due through September 2024, we understand this is a transition, and so we're not going to consider your loans delinquent or in default. So essentially, student loans are due right now, interest is accruing right now, but folks are not really going to feel or are not going to experience the real downsides of falling behind on student loans until September 2024. But when that time comes, you know, the downsides of not paying your federal student loans are substantial. If a borrower falls behind on their payments and then falls into default on their student loans, usually for federal student loans, it means they fall 9 months behind. There are some real significant consequences that borrowers will experience as a result of that default. Most notably, they're not going to be eligible for new federal loans. That's not just federal student loans, any federal loan. A borrower who's in default on their federal student loans can't get new loans from the government. The federal government also has really extensive powers to try and recover money that borrowers owe on their federal student loan debt. So, for example, they can offset some of your tax refund. And that can include your child tax credit or your earned income tax credit. They can also garnish wages. And they can even garnish Social Security retirement benefits to try to recover defaulted student loan payments. And what's more, the Department of Education and federal government can actually do all of that without going to court. They don't even have to get a judgment against you before taking these really extraordinary steps. So in addition to that, someone who's delinquent or in default on their student loans also will face pretty substantial credit damage as a result of that default. What we know about borrowers who are most likely to fall into default come September 2024 are the same borrowers who were likely to default at the time that the payment pause went into effect and who have been most failed by the federal student loan system. Low-income borrowers, borrowers of color, borrowers who attended for-profit schools, borrowers who never completed their program, and borrowers over the age of 40. So what does this mean? Stepping back, if you're a borrower, loans are going back into repayment. September 2024, this risk of default, is going to come back. What should a borrower be doing right now to get themselves in the best possible place to avoid these consequences? Income-driven repayment. It's IDR, IDR, IDR. I'm going to go through all of the various types of income-driven repayment and various repayment plans that are available to borrowers. But the big takeaway here, if you remember nothing else with respect to going back into repayment and finding the right payment plan for you, it's that the federal government offers different types of income-driven repayment plans that tie the amount a borrower has to pay each month to their income. It helps ensure essentially that borrowers are only required to pay an amount on their federal student loans that they can afford. And for some people, that means that their monthly payments are actually $0 a month. So that means they're making $0 payments each month, but their loans are in good standing. So they're avoiding all of those consequences we talked about. And they're actually taking steps to having their loans forgiven after a certain period of time. The entire process is pretty simple. You just do it through your loan servicer or the Department of Education, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But default rule when selecting an income-driven repayment plan is that there's a new plan we're going to talk about called the SAVE plan, which for most borrowers is going to yield the lowest monthly payment and the fastest time to federal student loan forgiveness. So that's big picture takeaway. But I want to start just briefly going through all of the different repayment plans that exist. And I'm going to go through these pretty quickly just because I do think the focus here should be just on the new SAVE plan. And the big takeaway here being, if you're eligible for the SAVE plan, that really will most likely be the best plan for you. So there are three different types of what are called baseline plans. And these are just plans that are not tied to your income. So for instance, a standard repayment plan, it's just a 10-year plan, takes your total amount of payments that you're going to owe, divides it by 10 years worth of payments, and that's what you pay each month. A graduated plan takes the total amount you're going to pay on your loan, and it starts off at a lower amount and increases over time, can be between 10 and 30 years. And then there's also an extended plan, which divides the total amount you're going to pay by an equal amount, but for an extended period of time up to 25 years. In general, these plans are not the best plans because they don't lead to loan forgiveness at the end of the plan. Particularly extended, you're paying for that extended period of time and it's not tied to your income. And so it's usually not the best plan for folks. Instead, an income-driven repayment plan is usually the best one. But even here, the federal government has created complexity because there are 4 different types of income-driven repayment plans. The first one is called income contingent repayment. And the only way you only need to worry about income contingent repayment if you have a consolidation loan that's paying off a Parent Plus loan. So if you have a Parent Plus loan and you've consolidated that, so you've made it into a new loan, the only IDR plan that you're going to be eligible for is income contingent repayment. And your loan servicer and the federal government should be able to help steer you into the right plan. Essentially, under ICR, a borrower will have to make 20% of their discretionary income towards their federal student loans, and loans are canceled after 25 years. There's also then income-based repayment. This plan is really only important for you to know about if you have one of those older FFEL loans and you haven't consolidated it. And here you're generally going to pay between 10 to 15% of your discretionary income to your loan, and it'll be canceled after 20 to 25 years. The third type of IDR plan is what's called pay-as-you-earn, payee. I'm not even going to spend any time on this because it's being phased out entirely. And then, as I flagged, the plan that you really need to know about is the new SAVE plan. And the reason you need to know about this is because for most borrowers, you're going to pay the lowest amount of money each month. In general, for undergraduate loans, it's only 5% of your discretionary income. If you have graduate loans, it's 10%. If you have a mix of loans, it'll be a weighted average of the two. One of the really neat features, though, of the SAVE plan is under all of the other income-driven repayment plans, borrowers will be making repayment, but will actually see their loan balances grow each month because interest will continue to accumulate and add on to the overall debt. Under the SAVE plan, what the Department of Education is going to be doing is, for any money that is not being paid to interest that would have otherwise accumulated during that month, the department is waiving that. And so what does that mean as a practical matter? If you're enrolled in the SAVE plan, and even if you have $0 payments each month, even if you otherwise would have had interest accruing because of that, your loan balance will not increase. It stays the same. You continue making the payments you can afford. And eventually, 20 to 25 years for most borrowers, you get those loans forgiven. That it's for most borrowers because the new SAVE plan also has lower periods of forgiveness for borrowers who have lower amounts of debt in the first place. So borrowers who started with $12,000 of undergraduate debt or less, they actually will be eligible for forgiveness after 10 years. And then for borrowers with $13,000 in debt, 11 years, $14,000 in debt, 12 years, and so on up to a max of 20 to 25 years.
Can I ask a question, please?
Of course.
Thank you. Okay, so I went on to studentaid.gov, and I changed my password, so I haven't been on since. But I need to get this started up again. But so if I go in there, I could just go and put in there that I want to join the SAVE plan, or do I have to? Is that something I can do, or how does that work as far as being able to pick what plan I want?
Yeah, so it's an excellent question, and it's actually exactly where I was going with this.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. It's a perfect question. There are two ways to apply. You can either do it directly from the federal student aid website. So literally, if you Google income-driven repayment plan, federal student aid, it'll take you to that website, and you can log in and apply through it. Or your loan servicer also, when you log in on your loan servicer's website. So for example, I have Mohila as my personal loan servicer. When I log into their website, I can just submit the form directly online through that portal. And when you are applying and you enter your income information, you can you can apply in two different ways. You can either say, I want you to put me in the plan that will give me the lowest monthly payment. So that's that first button. Or you can say, I want to be put into the save plan. And it's not listed on this because this is an old screenshot, but it would be listed right there.
Okay.
Sorry? Um, if you're not eligible for save for some reason, so you have a Parent Plus loan, let's say, and you click it anyway, on the back end, they just won't put you into that plan, and they'll either ask you if you want to be in a different plan, or will put you into the plan you're eligible for. But for most borrowers, you're going to be eligible for save, and so you can just specifically check it as you're going through the application. The application itself takes 10 to 15 minutes, super quick. Right now, if you are right now, you can just self-certify your income. In a few months, if you apply, you will either have to submit proof of your income, or you can actually, if you've submitted tax returns, there's a way where the application will allow you to directly link to your IRS submission. And so it's super easy, and the application will walk you through on exactly how to do that. One thing to note though is after you apply on a yearly basis, you have to recertify your income. And so usually your loan servicer should reach out to you when that recertification is due. But what I tell people is don't trust, loan servicers have made a lot of mistakes in the past. And so the best thing to do is when you apply, put a recurring calendar invite in whatever calendar you use. And so that on a yearly basis, you just go in and you recertify. You say, my income is the same amount, it hasn't changed, or it's gone up this amount, or it's gone down this amount. And then the department, they'll recalculate how much you owe, and you'll stay in good standing in that way.
Josh, we have one more question. Shauna has her hand raised.
Go for it, for sure.
Thank you. So I was on my credit report and I saw that apparently I'm paying like $70 a month, but I have not filled out any I haven't did the save or anything. So how is that? Because I believe before COVID my loans were in good standing. So did they automatically start charging me?
So a few questions. Were they federal student loans?
Yes.
Okay. And were they subject to the payment pause?
I don't know. And because I was going to do save, one of my friends had told me about it. And I never, so when I did try to do the save, it was back remember when I guess they got too many
Yeah.
submissions, and then they told me I was on a wait list or had to wait. So I never thought anything about it. And then when I pulled my Experian report, there it was. It was like, and it's like $77 a month.
So,
So
so I can't, so without, seeing your specific documents and, making sure you're eligible for legal aid services and all of that, I can't give kind of super specific advice tailored to you. But what I can say as a general matter is if you had an automatic payment set up before the payment pause, when repayment started in October, the department restarted that, and they also kept you in whatever plan you were enrolled in before the payment pause started. So if you were in a standard repayment plan and had an automatic payment going, that would be what you're in right now. If you were in an income-driven repayment plan before the payment pause and had an automatic repayment going, that's what you would also be in right now. Someone in your situation, what I would generally say is I would reach out to either the ombudsman's office at the Department of Education or your loan servicer to try to figure out if you were enrolled in SAVE because you were on the wait list, or kind of what your specific status was.
And one last question. So because the payment is good because for some reason after it started, my income went up. So I don't want to kind of call right now. But if I don't pay the not for the, until September, will I be out of default, or in September, if I started paying then, would I be okay? Because I know you said if like now we kind of getting a grace period.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to not pay the money and then in September get a default.
Yeah, so if for borrowers who don't make payments between now and September, they won't be put into default, but interest is going to continue to accrue on the account. And so, the general advice that we tell people is if you're able to make the payment right now, you should make the payment right now. Number one, just so you can cut down on the interest that's accruing each month. And number two, just so you don't have to worry about remembering to set everything up in September. If you're someone who finds yourself in a situation where you really it's better for you financially not to make payments until September, interest will accrue, but you will not be placed if you have a federal student loan, a direct or a department held FFEL loans, you won't move into default until September comes around. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. I just was thinking like so it doesn't make sense not to pay it because then in September I'll be in default.
So only if you don't make payments starting in September. So for instance, if you don't make payments between now and August, but then start it up again in September, assuming you have a federal student loan that is direct or department held, you would not be in default in that scenario, but interest would accrue in that scenario.
Oh, so I would have 9 months from September to fall into default if I didn't pay.
Correct. But if you did not, that's correct. But you would be delinquent upon your first month of not making repayment in September. So like, let's say you didn't pay in September and October, you wouldn't be in default, but you would take a credit hit. You would be delinquent at that point.
Okay.
So there would still be negative consequences.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So I also want to kind of moving away from income-driven repayment. I just want to briefly note two time-limited programs that are available: Fresh Start and the IDR account adjustment. So the first is the Fresh Start program, and this program is for federal student loan borrowers who were in default before the payment pause started. Excuse me. And so for these borrowers, essentially what the Department of Education is saying is, we want to give you a fresh start. If you were in default before the payment pause began, now that repayment is restarting, we're going to allow you to get into good standing. And the way these borrowers can do that is either by calling the default resolution group, so that number that's on the screen right there, and that's if their loans are physically, if they're held and owned by the federal government, or they can call what's called a guarantee agency if they have one of those commercially held FFEL loans that we talked about before. And that website has all of the different guarantee agencies listed and their contact information. Again, for borrowers who don't know what type of loans they have or who they should call, the Federal Student Aid website has a number, has just a contact us number. You call that, you say, what type of loans do I have? Who owns them? Who has them? And they'll be able to tell you who to call to get your loans into the Fresh Start program. But essentially, all a borrower needs to do to benefit from this program, to have their loans not go back into default, is to call that number, to call the person who owns their loans and say, I want to benefit from the Fresh Start program, move my loans back into good standing, and put me into an income-driven repayment plan. The benefits of doing it is, credit is fixed, no collections, no involuntary collections, eligibility for other loans, and so forth. It's time limited though. Come September 1st of this year, Fresh Start will be over, which means borrowers who were in default before the payment pause began and who have not opted for Fresh Start will then have their loans go into delinquency and default once more. The other time-limited program, and you may have heard about this in the news recently, you may have heard about 800,000 so borrowers getting their loans discharged, is what's called the income-driven repayment account adjustment. And essentially, under this program, the Department of Education has done a review and is doing a review of all of long-standing loans that borrowers have had. It's essentially saying, we've kind of messed up the federal student loan program. Our loan servicers have also made a lot of mistakes. And there are a lot of people who should have hit that 20 or 25-year income-driven repayment forgiveness, but haven't been able to do so because of our mistake. And so what they're doing right now is they're going back in time and they're counting any month that was in any repayment status whatsoever, or that was in certain forbearances or certain deferments. And they're saying that's going to count for IDR forgiveness purposes. So for most borrowers, you don't have to, if you have federal loans, there's nothing that you actually need to do to benefit from this. If you have direct loans or government-held FFEL loans, you're going to get this benefit automatically. You're going to be closer to forgiveness than you may have been because of this account adjustment. If you have commercially held FFEL loans, though, you have to consolidate those loans by April 1st of this year. Otherwise, you're not going to benefit from this program. And the upshot of this program, if you've had loans in repayment for a long period of time and they haven't been in default, you're going to be closer to forgiveness. You're going to get forgiveness potentially if it's 20, 25 years. Or what's really cool is if you work in public service, so you work for a nonprofit organization or you work for the government, you can also get this time to count for public service loan forgiveness. So that means time that might have not counted before for public service loan forgiveness is going to count. So essentially, they're doing this big review. Hopefully, we'll get a lot more people closer to forgiveness. I think at the end of this year, they're expecting 3 to 4 million more borrowers to get their loans forgiven as a result of this program. Only thing you need to do is if you have commercially held FFEL loans, you need to consolidate those loans. The other big program that I get asked a lot about that I also just want to touch on very briefly is kind of broad-based cancellation. You may have heard about the one-time student loan cancellation program that the Biden administration tried to do for borrowers. It was between $10,000 and $20,000 in forgiveness. Unfortunately, in June of 2023, the Supreme Court struck that down and said the administration couldn't do that. The Department of Education and the government is trying to do a round two right now and trying to figure out whether there's any way they can do it legally. So, stay tuned is what I would say on that. I wouldn't, bank on that. I wouldn't, financially plan on that. But, just pay attention in the news to see if cancellation might happen in the future.
And can I just ask a quick question on that? So if we're already signed up for that, because they had us sign up, like, I don't know, a year or whatever ago it was, whenever they started talking about this, there was an application that you fill out. So if you fill that out, is that still like in hold or in the loop somewhere, do you think? Or
So it's not. So unfortunately so that if it's the $10,000 to $20,000 forgiveness program, unfortunately, the department can't do anything with those applications anymore, and the whole program has been kind of struck down by the Supreme Court. And so essentially, it's as if you'd never put in that application.
so a do-over. Okay, thank you.
But that's not the only, I do want to note that that's not the only cancellation program that exists in the world. There are some really specific programs that borrowers can be eligible for to have their loans discharged. And I'm not going to go through all of them in much detail now. I just want to flag them for you so that you could say to yourself or to someone you know, hey, you should look into this on the Department of Education's website, or you should reach out to legal aid, because there may be cancellation programs that are available to you. The first is called Borrower Defense to Repayment. This is for borrowers who attended a school that essentially defrauded them. Usually, but not always, it's a for-profit school. So, they promise you the world, they promise you a certain income, they promise you a guaranteed job, but it was all a sham. There's a way to petition the federal government to get those loans discharged. You might also be eligible for a discharge what's called false certification. Essentially, these are discharges that exist if you never should have had the loans to begin with. So someone forged your signature, someone stole your identity, you never had a high school diploma or GED, so you never should have had federal loans to begin with. That's what those discharge programs are available for. For someone who's totally and permanently disabled, so they're unable to work, they're unable to go back to school, they can get their loans discharged through the Total and Permanent Disability Discharge Program. There's also a closed school discharge program. So essentially, you were attending school when it closed, and you weren't able to do anything with all that debt you took out and all that schooling. You can get those loans discharged. And then I mentioned it before, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. If you work at a nonprofit or government entity for a 10-year period, and you're in an income-driven repayment plan and making payments for those 10 years, the government will forgive your loans at the end of that time period. So a few resources where you can find more details on all of this that we've talked about. The legal aid website, we actually have a whole toolkit for student loan borrowers at that website. There are a whole bunch of really specific situations that borrowers may find themselves in, and that website has additional resources and advice on what you can do. There's also a similar toolkit for service providers. So if you work for an organization that works with a lot of student loan borrowers, there's a specific kind of toolkit for you as well to turn to give advice to folks. I also mentioned that in Economic Justice Information Line, we answer questions about student loans. Just give us a call. You'll leave a voicemail with your name and contact information and the question that you have, and someone will get back to you. Also, two really great resources from other organizations. The Student Borrower Protection Center has this website, cancelmystudentdebt.org, which could answer a lot of questions. And the National Consumer Law Center has the Student Loan Borrower Assistance Project, which also has a lot of kind of do-it-yourself information for you to find. So I'm gonna stop there and stop sharing my screen, but I'm happy to answer any other questions that folks have. I know it's student loans seems like this, big, easy topic, but once you get in, there's just so much there and it's really complicated. Yes, Kelly.
So does the Legal Aid Society have any information about personal loans? Is there anything that can be done for the personal loans?
So you mean like private student loans?
Private, yeah.
Yeah, so it depends on the situation the borrower finds themselves in. So for example, we have represented borrowers with private student loans who are being sued on those loans. So
Okay.
we've stepped in and defended students in that situation. We've also students who have loans with their institution. We've worked with students in that situation. And students who are disabled and who have private student loans, it's completely up to the lender, but there are some lenders who have total and permanent disability programs themselves. And so we've worked with students to apply for those programs. I can't promise that, our intake will be open at any given point, or that, someone is eligible for our services. But what I would say is if you find yourself in a situation where you think legal help might be useful on private student loans, call our intake line. Another organization in Cleveland, College Now, will also do one-on-one advising with folks. So if you're just like interested in figuring out, how do I pay for these? What's the best plan for me personally, given like here are my finances specifically? College Now, go to their website, set up a one-on-one appointment with them. They are wonderful, and they do that. Any other questions?
I have two. With disability, do you have to prove, like, so if somebody said,
Yeah, so for the federal disability program, there are essentially three different ways that someone can prove that they're totally and permanently disabled. The first is if someone is on Social Security disability, depending on how long they've been on that or how long they're expected to be on that, that automatically can actually make them entitled to that discharge. So over the past few years, the Department of Education has expanded its information sharing with the Social Security Administration. And so a lot of folks are actually getting automatic loan discharges just by virtue of their Social Security disability. If you've been on Social Security disability for a while, for at least 5 years, or anticipate being on it for at least 5 years, you can also apply on that basis. So that's option one. Option two for the federal program is if you have a veterans related disability, in which case you can apply with proof of that, or the Veterans Affairs Administration also has information sharing with the Department of Education. And so some of that's happening automatically. And then the third way is through what's called a physician's certification. And so essentially, you fill out a form, and then either your doctor or the physician's the nurse practitioner or a psychologist or psychiatrist can fill out the form. And basically what they have to say, they have to attest to, is that your disability is expected to prevent you from working or going to school for at least 5 years. That's the standard that they use. So you do have to prove it, but it's not, an onerous or really significant or substantial proving process. It's really either you're on a program already, which Social Security Disability does have a more rigorous process, or your physician attests to it and fills out a form on your behalf.
Okay, and then the second question. So I went to a school that sold it to another school and then sold it to a profit and still am not working, based on what they were saying. Would I be eligible to consider the closed school?
So what it depends on, so I can't, unfortunately, I can't answer that in the abstract just because that would depend on the specific school and kind of how it closed and what exactly was sold. What I would say is, number one, I think I wouldn't say do it right now because I think our intake on student loans is going to close for a little while. But in a few months, reach out to legal aid and we might potentially be able to look into that if you're eligible for our services. Number two, depending on what school it is, there may have already been some borrower defense applications submitted, or some folks who have kind of looked into this already. And so I might either Google the school's name with the words borrower defense to repayment or with the words closed school discharge, or look at the Project on Predatory Student Lending's website might also have information. But the other piece to know about closed school discharge is you had to have been attending at the time it closed. And so, for instance, if it closed years after you attended, then you wouldn't be eligible for that program. Deborah.
Hello. Okay, so my question is, I know you said before that they started charging interest as of October 1st, September 1st. So when I've been getting bills from Mohila and it says zero due. I need to set up a repayment plan for this. But anyway, would if it does say on here, which I just realized this last time, be aware interest will continue to accrue daily. Is it not supposed to reflect on my balance, or will that just pop up? I mean, how do I see that interest rate? Will that? I guess what I'm trying, because every time I get a bill from them, and I've been saving it because I need to. Obviously I'm trying to get back on the repayment plan, but every month they send me a bill, it still shows the same amount. So when are they gonna put that interest on there, or is it just, I don't want to be hit with that in the long run?
Yeah. So is the amount it's showing is zero?
Yeah, it shows zero due, but it says too that if current due reflects zero, be aware that interest will continue to accrue daily. But it's not showing what. It's not showing my interest rate on here at all.
Yeah. So you might need to either poke around in your Mohila account to try and find that information, or reach out to the Ombudsman's office at the Department of Education. It should monthly, it should kind of go into your overall total, and it might be that you're already in the safe plan. It also might be there have been a whole bunch of problems with return to repayment where people who did not request forbearances were put into forbearances. And so it's possible you're in a forbearance you never asked for. And so that's why it's showing as $0. So really, it's hard for me to say in the abstract. I think my general information there would just be, I think you may need to poke around a bit more and or reach out to the Ombudsman's office.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And I'm going to put into the chat right now the website and the contact information for the Ombuds office. They're who I go to when I have a problem for a client, because they're there to help folks.
Awesome. And any other questions? Well, this has been a riveting conversation. Like you said, you probably could use a full day just talking about all of the information related to student loan repayment. So I would like to thank Josh for being able to take on this subject. It was actually something that we wanted to do in November and had to reschedule. So I appreciate you being flexible and still being committed to share this topic. I think our guests, thank you for having some questions and being a part of the engagement. We got the clappy hands from Deborah. Thank you very much. If we don't have any more questions, I'll give everyone the respective time. I know that we went over a few minutes, but this was good. I want to make sure that everyone was able to get their questions answered. Be sure to look in the chat before we disconnect that link that Joshua sent so that you have time to click on that or copy the link so that you can go back to that later on. This is a recorded call, so I'm going to make sure we get things uploaded so it can be available for on demand at a later time. So thank you for joining us today for the Dress for Success Cleveland Lunch and Learn. And be on the lookout for future topics. You can check our website, or if you're receiving our Success Press newsletter, which comes out 2 times a month. And you can also see some of our workshops on our social media channels as well. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you.
Thank you.